Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. I was 52 years old the night Darian knocked on my door, and I hadn't seen him in 3 years. 3 years since he broke my daughter Amara's heart and left her crying on my couch for 6 straight months. 3 years since I swore if I ever saw his face again, I'd slam the door so hard the hinges would break. But when I opened that door at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, rain pouring down like God himself was crying, there he stood, soaking wet, eyes red, hands shaking, and the first words out of his mouth weren't, "I'm sorry," or "Is Amara here?" No. He looked me dead in my eyes and said, "Miss Lorraine, I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. I've been thinking about you since the day we met, and I can't take it anymore." My heart stopped, my breath caught, and before I could curse him out, before I could tell him to get his disrespectful behind off my porch, he said the words that made my knees weak and my mind spin. "Just give me one chance, one night. That's all I'm asking." I should have slapped him. I should have called Amara right then and there. But I didn't, because somewhere deep inside me, in a place I didn't want to admit existed, I'd felt it too. That tension, that heat, the way his eyes lingered on me just a little too long when he'd come over for Sunday dinner, the way he'd compliment my cooking, my smile, my dress, in a tone that felt like more than respect. I'd pushed it down, buried it, told myself I was a grown woman, a mother, a grandmother even, and I had no business entertaining thoughts about my daughter's man. But now he was standing here dripping wet, confessing what I'd been too scared to even think about. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, a piece of me wanted to let him in. Not because I didn't love my daughter, not because I wasn't disgusted with myself, but because for the first time in years, someone was looking at me like I was more than just mama, more than just grandma, like I was still a woman, a desirable woman. And God help me, I was tired of being invisible. "Get off my porch," I finally said, but my voice didn't have the fire it should have had. It came out shaky, uncertain, almost like a question instead of a command. Darian didn't move. He just stood there, rain dripping off his nose, staring at me with those brown eyes that used to make Amara melt. "I know you feel it too," he said, his voice low and rough. "I see the way you look at me when you think nobody's watching. I see you, Ms. Lorraine. I see you." My stomach twisted, my chest tightened, because he was right. I had looked, I had wondered, and now standing in my doorway with the rain drumming on my roof and the streetlights casting shadows across his face, I was faced with a choice that could destroy everything I'd built. My relationship with my daughter, my reputation, my self-respect, all of it hanging in the balance because this man had the audacity to show up and put words to the thing I've been trying to pretend didn't exist. "You need to leave," I said again, but I still hadn't closed the door. That was my first mistake, because Darian took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the rain on his skin, close enough that I could see the desperation in his eyes. "One chance," he whispered, "one night. And if you tell me to leave after that, I'll disappear forever. I swear it." My hand gripped the door frame so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was screaming at me to slam the door, to call him every name in the book, to protect my daughter the way any good mother would. But my body, my traitorous, lonely, touch-starved body, was leaning forward, just an inch, just enough that he noticed, just enough that the line I'd been trying so hard to keep between us started to blur. And in that moment, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I was actually considering it. Behind me, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I turned my head just slightly, and I saw Amara's name light up the screen. My baby girl, my firstborn, the one I'd stayed up all night with when she had colic, the one I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college, the one whose heart this man had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. And here I was, standing in my doorway, contemplating the unthinkable. The phone kept buzzing, Darian kept staring, and I stood frozen between two versions of myself: the mother I'd always been and the woman I'd forgotten I was. The rain got louder, the night got darker, and I had to make a choice that would change everything. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have possibly known in that moment, was that this wasn't just about temptation. This wasn't just about loneliness or desire. There was something deeper happening here, something darker, and by the time I figured it out, it would be too late to turn back. Let me take you back to where this mess really began, because nothing happens in a vacuum, and the truth is I'd been lonely long before Darian ever showed up at my door. My husband Marcus left me 15 years ago for a woman half his age, some 25-year-old dental hygienist with long weave and no stretch marks. He didn't just leave, he erased me, stopped paying the mortgage, cleaned out our joint account, and moved to Arizona without so much as a goodbye to our daughters. I had to work double shifts at the hospital, pick up weekend catering gigs, and sell my mama's china just to keep the lights on. Amara was 17 then, my youngest Simone was 14, and they watched me cry myself to sleep more nights than I cared to admit. I built myself back up piece by piece, but somewhere along the way, I forgot I was still a woman with needs, with desires, with a heart that wanted to be held. I became mama, then grandma, and that was it. Until Darian walked into my kitchen 3 years ago with his smooth smile and his chef's hands and his way of making me feel seen. Amara met him at a food festival in downtown Charlotte. She came home glowing, talking about this fine black man who owned his own catering company and made the best jerk chicken she'd ever tasted. She brought him to Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, and I remember the moment he walked through my door, tall, dark-skinned, with neat locks pulled back in a ponytail and a smile that could light up a whole room. He shook my hand, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Ms. Lorraine, Amara told me you're the real chef in the family. I'm just here to learn from the master." I laughed it off, but I felt something, a flutter, a warmth, something I hadn't felt in years. He was 32, I was 49, and I told myself I was being ridiculous. But over the next year, as he became a fixture in our lives, that flutter never went away. It grew, quietly, dangerously, like a weed pushing through concrete, small at first, but impossible to ignore once it took root. Darian was good to Amara at first. He brought her flowers, took her on weekend trips, talked about marriage and babies and building something real. He'd come over and help me cook, chopping onions while I seasoned the chicken, telling me stories about growing up in Atlanta and learning to cook from his Jamaican grandmother. We'd laugh, we'd talk, and sometimes when Amara was in the bathroom or on the phone, he'd catch my eye and hold it just a second too long. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself he was just being friendly, respectful, the way a good man should be with his girlfriend's mama. But deep down, I knew better. There was electricity in the air whenever we were alone, a tension that made my skin prickle and my heart race. And I hated myself for it. Because I loved my daughter. I would die for my daughter. But I couldn't kill what I was feeling no matter how hard I tried. Then the cracks started showing. Amara would call me crying because Darian had stayed out all night without calling. She'd show up at my house with red eyes because he'd snapped at her over something small. He started missing family dinners, coming up with excuses about work, about clients, about stress. I watched my baby girl shrink, watched her confidence drain away as she bent herself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to keep him happy. And I hated him for it. But I also couldn't stop thinking about him, couldn't stop wondering what it would feel like if those chef's hands that chopped vegetables in my kitchen ever touched my skin. Couldn't stop replaying the way he'd brush past me in the hallway, close enough that I could smell his cologne. It was sick, it was wrong, and I prayed every night for God to take these feelings away, but he didn't. Or Maybe he did and I just wasn't listening. Either way, the feelings stayed and they festered, growing stronger every time I saw him, every time he smiled at me, every time Amara cried over him and I held her, all while a shameful part of me wondered what he tasted like. The breakup happened on a Sunday. Amara found text messages on his phone, messages to other women, messages that made it clear she wasn't the only one, maybe never had been. She came to my house sobbing, mascara running down her face, her whole body shaking. I held her on my couch for hours while she cried into my chest, and I whispered every comforting thing a mother should say. You deserve better. He's not worth your tears. You're going to get through this. And I meant every word. But that night, after she finally fell asleep in my guest room, I sat alone in my kitchen with a glass of wine, and I thought about Darian. I thought about how he'd ruined my daughter. I thought about how I should hate him. And I did hate him. But I also couldn't stop the ache low in my belly when I pictured his face. That's when I knew I was broke, and that's when I knew something inside me had twisted into something ugly and unforgivable. Because a good mother wouldn't feel this way. A good mother wouldn't look at her daughter's ex and feel anything but disgust. But apparently I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And 3 years later, when he showed up at my door asking for one chance, that brokenness came rushing back like it had never left. I didn't let Darian in that night. I closed the door, locked it, and stood there shaking until I heard his footsteps fade down my driveway and his car pull away into the rain. Then I collapsed against the wall and cried, not because I was strong enough to turn him away, but because I was terrified of how close I'd come to saying yes. I called Amara back. She'd just been checking in, asking if I needed anything from the store. Her voice was light, happy even. She'd moved on, started dating someone new, a lawyer named Trevor, who treated her like a queen. She was thriving, and here I was, hiding in my kitchen, trembling over her ex like some desperate fool. I couldn't tell her. I could never tell her. So I swallowed it down, told her I was fine, and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that conversation. His words, his eyes, the way he'd said my name. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was over. He'd gotten his answer. He'd leave me alone now. But I was wrong. 2 days later, he texted me. The message came through at 3 p.m. while I was at work. I almost dropped my phone when I saw his name. I meant what I said, Miss Lorraine. I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong. I know you probably hate me, but I had to try. You deserve to feel wanted. You deserve to feel beautiful. And I see you. I really see you. I should have blocked him, should have deleted the message and moved on with my life, but instead I read it 3 more times, then 5 more, then I saved it. Because nobody had said anything like that to me in over a decade. Nobody had made me feel seen, desired, like I was more than just somebody's mama or somebody's coworker. Darian was offering me something I didn't even know I was starving for. And the worst part, I wanted more. I didn't respond that day or the next, but the message stayed in my phone like a loaded gun, and I kept going back to it, reading it, feeling that dangerous flutter in my chest, wondering what would happen if I just sent one word back, just one. Okay. A week passed, then another text came. I'm not trying to pressure you. I just need you to know that what I feel is real. You're stunning, Mrs. Lorraine. You're strong and smart and sexy, and I've been a fool for not saying it sooner. I messed up with Amara. I know that. But I can't lie about this anymore. I want you. This time, my hands were shaking so hard I almost couldn't type, but I did. I typed 3 words I knew I shouldn't. This is wrong. He responded in seconds. I know, but doesn't it feel right? And God help me, it did. It felt like someone finally saw past the apron and the tired eyes and the gray hairs I tried to cover up. It felt like someone was choosing me, not because I was convenient or safe or motherly, but because I was desirable, because I was a woman. A real woman with curves and fire and years of passion I'd locked away because nobody wanted it anymore. Darian was offering me a key to that locked room, and I was standing at the door, my hand on the knob, knowing full well that if I turned it, everything would change. We didn't meet up right away. We texted carefully, secretly. Messages I delete as soon as I read them, terrified that Amara would somehow find out. He'd ask about my day. I'd tell him about work, about my patients, about the little things that filled my life. And he'd respond with interest, with attention, with the kind of focus that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. He'd send me compliments that made my stomach flip. "I bet you look beautiful today." Or, "I'm thinking about your smile. I wish I could cook for you the way you cooked for me." And slowly, piece by piece, my resistance crumbled, because loneliness is a powerful thing. It makes you rationalize. It makes you justify. It makes you believe that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be selfish this one time. That maybe taking something for yourself doesn't make you a bad mother. That maybe you can compartmentalize, keep it separate, never let it touch the rest of your life. I was lying to myself, of course, but lies are easier to believe when you're desperate. 3 weeks after that first text, I agreed to meet him. Not at his place, not at mine, somewhere neutral, a coffee shop 2 towns over where nobody would recognize us. I told myself it was just coffee, just a conversation, nothing more. I wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, but I put on makeup for the first time in months. I styled my hair. I chose earrings that caught the light. And when I walked into that coffee shop and saw him sitting in the corner booth, my heart damn near exploded. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes going wide. And the first thing he said was, "Lorraine, you're breathtaking." Not Ms. Lorraine, just Lorraine. Like I was a woman, not a title. Like I was his equal, not his elder. And I sat down across from him, hands folded in my lap, and let myself pretend, just for an hour, that I wasn't betraying my daughter, that I wasn't destroying myself, that this was okay. We talked, we laughed. He told me about his business, about his dreams, about the things that kept him up at night. And I listened, soaking it all in, feeling more alive than I had in years. When the hour was up, he walked me to my car, and before I could say goodbye, he leaned in close and whispered, "One chance, Lorraine. That's all I need. Let me show you how a woman like you should be treated." And this time, when I drove away, I didn't cry. I smiled, because I'd already made up my mind. I was going to say yes. The night I finally let Darian into my home, I sent Amara a text saying I was going to bed early. My youngest, Simone, was away at grad school in Chicago, and the house felt emptier than usual. I'd spent the whole day cleaning, changing my sheets, lighting candles like I was preparing for something sacred instead of something sinful. When his car pulled into my driveway at 9:30, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. He stepped inside, and for a moment we just stood there in my living room, the air thick with everything we'd been avoiding for 3 years. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and said, "You sure about this?" I wasn't sure about anything, but I nodded anyway because the loneliness had swallowed me whole. And for one night, I wanted to feel like someone's first choice. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and every alarm bell in my head was screaming at me to stop. But I didn't. I let him lead me upstairs. I let him undress me. I let him touch me in ways I hadn't been touched in years. And for those few hours, I forgot I was a mother. I forgot I was a grandmother. I was just Lorraine, just a woman, just someone who mattered. Afterwards, we lay tangled in my sheets, his arm draped across my waist, and reality came crashing back like a freight train. What had I done? What had I just done to my daughter, to myself? Darian must have felt me tense up because he tightened his grip and whispered, "Don't regret this. Please don't regret this." But regret was already pooling in my chest, heavy and cold. I pulled away, sat up, wrapped myself in my robe. "You need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He sat up too, reaching for my hand. "Lorraine, listen. No, I cut him off, standing now, putting distance between us. This was a mistake, a huge mistake. You need to go, and we need to pretend this never happened. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw something dark flicker across his face. Not anger exactly, something else, something colder. You think you can just use me and throw me away? Maybe he said, his tone shifting to you think I'm just some boy you can dismiss? My blood ran cold. Excuse me? I opened myself up to you, he said, standing now, pulling on his clothes. I told you things I've never told anyone, and now you want to act like I'm nothing? I should have been scared. Maybe I was, but anger rose up faster than fear. You came to me, I shot back. You knocked on my door, remember? You're the one who couldn't let it go. He stepped closer, and the air between us went sharp. And you're the one who let me in? You wanted this just as much as I did? Don't act like you're some victim. The truth of his words hit me like a slap. He was right. I had wanted this. I had chosen this. And now I had to live with it. Get out, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Get out of my house and don't ever come back. For a long moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he grabbed his jacket, headed for the door, and paused at the threshold. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. Not because of me, but because you'll realize you gave up the one person who actually saw you. Then he was gone. And I was left standing in my bedroom, my body still warm from his touch, my heart shattering into pieces I didn't know how to put back together. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at my phone, waiting for something terrible to happen, waiting for Amara to call and say she knew, waiting for my world to explode. But nothing happened. The hours ticked by in silence. Morning came. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away what I'd done. I went to work, went through the motions, smiled at my patients, and pretended I was fine. But inside, I was dying. I'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the weight of it was crushing me. Days passed, then a week. Darian didn't contact me, didn't text, didn't show up, and I told myself it was over. I dodged a bullet. I could bury this secret, take it to my grave, and no one would ever have to know. But life doesn't work like that. Secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, and mine was about to destroy everything. It started small. Amara mentioned she'd run into Darian at a networking event. He asked about you, she said casually over the phone. My heart stopped. What did he say? Just asked how you were doing, told me to tell you hello. She laughed. I thought it was sweet. He's always been respectful of you, Mama. Respectful. The word made me want to vomit. I mumbled something non-committal and changed the subject. But the seed was planted. Darian was playing a game and I didn't know the rules. A few days later, he texted me. One line. Amara says hi. Thought you should know. It was a threat. A subtle one, but a threat nonetheless. He was letting me know he had power, that he could blow my life up whenever he wanted. I blocked his number immediately, but the damage was done. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I jumped every time my phone rang, terrified it would be Amara calling to confront me. And then, 3 weeks after our night together, everything changed. Because Darian didn't just tell Amara, he did something far worse. He showed up at my job, walked right into the hospital where I worked, found me in the break room, and sat down across from me like we were old friends. We need to talk, he said. I looked around panicked, but we were alone. You need to leave, I hissed. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said calmly. I'm here to make you an offer. My stomach dropped. What kind of offer? He leaned back, folding his arms. I want to be with you, Lorraine. For real. Not just one night. I want us to be together. I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Are you insane? We can't... Amara doesn't have to know, he said smoothly. We can be discreet. You deserve happiness, Lorraine. Don't you want that? My hands were shaking. You need to leave. Now. He stood, But before he walked away, he leaned in close and whispered, "You've got until Friday to decide. Either we do this my way, or I tell Amara everything, your choice." Then he left, and I sat there in that break room, my entire world collapsing around me because Darian wasn't asking, he was blackmailing me, and I had no idea how to stop him. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Who could I possibly confess this to without destroying my life? I thought about calling my sister, my best friend, even my pastor, but every time I picked up the phone, shame choked the words back down. So I carried it alone, that terrible secret burning a hole through my chest. I had 3 days until Darian's deadline night, and I spent every waking moment trying to figure out what to do. I could tell Amara myself, come clean, throw myself on her mercy. But the thought of seeing the betrayal in her eyes, the disgust, the heartbreak, it was too much. I could call the police maybe, say he was harassing me, but what proof did I have? Our text messages were deleted, and if it came out that I'd willingly slept with him, I'd look like the villain, not the victim. There was no good option, no way out that didn't end in my complete destruction. So I did what I've been doing for weeks. I pretended everything was fine and prayed for a miracle. Thursday night, Amara came over for dinner. She'd been glowing lately, happy with Trevor, talking about taking a trip to Mexico, about maybe moving in together. I watched her across my dinner table, laughing at something on her phone, completely oblivious to the bomb ticking underneath our relationship. And I hated myself so deeply it felt like poison in my veins. "Mom, are you okay?" She asked, looking up at me with concerned eyes. "And you've barely touched your food." I forced a smile. "Just tired, baby. Long week at work." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "You work too hard. You need to take care of yourself. Maybe go on a date or something. When's the last time you went out?" The irony nearly broke me. I laughed, but it came out hollow. "I'm too old for all that." "No, you're not," she said firmly. "You're beautiful, Mama. You deserve to have somebody treat you right." I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and changed the subject. After she left, I sat in my kitchen and cried until I had nothing left. Friday came. I woke up with a text from Darian. "Time's up. What's it going to be?" My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. I could feel my life splitting into two paths, one where I gave into his demands and became his secret, losing every shred of dignity I had left, and one where I told Amara the truth and lost her forever. Neither was survivable, but I had to choose. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on 4 words, each was, "Leave me alone." His response was immediate. "Wrong answer." My phone rang 5 seconds later. It was Amara. My heart stopped. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before I answered, my voice barely steady. "Hey, baby." "Mama?" she said, and there was something in her tone that made my blood turn to ice. "Can you come over? I need to talk to you about something." The room started spinning. "What's wrong?" Can you come? Please?" I grabbed my keys with shaking hands. The 15-minute drive to her apartment felt like an eternity. My mind raced through 1,000 terrible scenarios. Did Darian tell her already? Did she somehow find out? Was this it? Was this the moment everything fell apart? When I walked into her apartment, Amara was sitting on her couch, her face pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying. Trevor was there too, standing by the window, his expression grim. My legs almost gave out. "Baby, what's wrong?" I asked, rushing to her side. She looked up at me and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Mama, Darian's been texting me." My heart stopped. "What?" "He's been saying things," she continued, her voice breaking. "Crazy things about you, about him. I don't even know if I should believe it, but..." She pulled out her phone, and I saw the messages, screenshots, paragraphs, all from Darian painting a twisted picture of what had happened between us. But he'd lied. He'd made it sound like I'd seduced him, like I'd been pursuing him for years, like he'd finally given in out of pity. My vision blurred. "Amara, is any of it true?" She cut me off, her voice sharp now, angry. "Did something happen between you two?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The truth was stuck in my throat, tangled up with shame and fear and desperation. Trevor stepped forward. "Mrs. Lorraine, maybe you should go. Amara needs space right now." "No," I said, finding my voice. "No, I need to explain." Amara stood, backing away from me like I was a stranger. "Explain what, Mama? Explain how you slept with my ex? Explain how you've been lying to me for weeks?" Tears poured down my face. It wasn't like that. "He came to me. He manipulated me. He's been blackmailing me." "Blackmailing you?" she shouted. "With what? The truth that you betrayed me?" "Amara, please, get out," she said, her voice cold and final. "Get out of my apartment. I can't even look at you right now." I reached for her, but she jerked away. "Don't touch me." Trevor gently took my arm. "You should go, Mrs. Lorraine." I stumbled toward the door, my entire world crumbling. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. "Amara, I'm so sorry. I never meant..." But she'd already turned away. I drove home through tears so thick I could barely see the road. When I walked into my empty house, I collapsed on the floor and sobbed. Everything I'd feared had come true. I'd lost my daughter. I'd lost my integrity. I'd lost myself. And it was all because I'd been lonely enough, desperate enough, foolish enough to believe that a man like Darian could see me as anything other than a conquest. I'd been wrong, and now I had to live with the consequence. But this story wasn't over yet, not even close, because Darian had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated who I was before the loneliness, before the desperation, before I'd forgotten that I was more than just Mama. I was Lorraine. And Lorraine didn't go down without a fight. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and I did what I should have done from the beginning. I gathered evidence. Every text message Darian had sent me before I deleted them was backed up in my cloud. Every manipulative word, every veiled threat, every confession of his obsession. It was all there. I took screenshots of everything. Then I started digging into Darian's life, his business, his social media, his past, and what I found made my blood run cold. I wasn't the first. There were others. Other women he dated, other mothers he gotten close to, other families he infiltrated with his charm and his lies. I found a Facebook post from 2 years ago, a woman warning others about him, calling him a manipulator, saying he tried to come between her and her daughter. The post had been deleted, but I found it cached. I found more stories buried in comments, in forum posts and reviews on his business page that had been scrubbed. Darian was a predator, and I'd been too blind, too lonely, too flattered to see it. But now I saw everything clearly, and I was going to burn him down. I called a lawyer first thing Monday morning, a woman named Patricia Chin, sharp as a knife, who listened to my story without judgment and then laid out my options. "We can file a restraining order based on harassment and blackmail," she said. "But you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. He's going to fight back, and it's going to be public. I don't care," I said, and I meant it. "I need to protect my daughter. I need to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Patricia nodded. "Then let's get to work." We filed that afternoon a restraining order, a police report documenting his threats, and a civil suit for emotional distress and blackmail. By Wednesday, Darian had been served, and by Thursday, my phone was blowing up. Not with angry calls from Amara, she still wasn't speaking to me, but with messages from other women who'd seen the news coverage of my lawsuit, women who recognized Darian's picture, women who had their own stories to tell. Within a week, 3 more women had come forward with similar experiences. The pattern was undeniable. Darian targeted single mothers, charmed them, got close to their families, and then exploited the relationships for his own twisted gratification. He was sick, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, and in that time, I became a woman I didn't recognize. Strong, fierce, unshakable. I went on the local news and told my story, not hiding behind shame anymore, but owning what I'd done and exposing what he'd done. "I made a terrible mistake," I said into the camera, my voice steady. I let loneliness cloud my judgment, and I hurt my daughter in the process. But what Darian Westbrook did was calculated. It was predatory. And I'm standing here today to make sure he never does it to another family again. The interview went viral. Support poured in from strangers across the country, other single mothers, other women who'd been manipulated by charming men, other families torn apart by betrayal. But the person I wanted to hear from most stayed silent. Amara still wouldn't take my calls, wouldn't answer my texts. Simone had flown home from Chicago, and she was furious with both of us. Furious with me for what I'd done, furious with Amara for cutting me off completely. "She needs time, Mama," Simone said, sitting across from me in my living room. "You broke her trust. That's not something that heals overnight." "I know," I whispered, "but I need her to know I'm fighting for her. I'm fighting to make this right." The day before the court hearing, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Trevor, Amara's boyfriend. "Mrs. Lorraine," he said, his voice careful, "I think you should know something. Amara's been struggling. She's not eating, barely sleeping. She's angry, but she's also heartbroken. She misses you." My breath caught. "Then why won't she talk to me?" "Because she doesn't know how." He said, "She feels betrayed, but she also knows you're her mom. She's torn up inside, and honestly, I think she needs to see you fight for this. She needs to see you're not just sorry, you're doing something about it." I wiped my eyes. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm going to fix this, whatever it takes." "I will," Trevor said. "And Mrs. Lorraine? For what?" "It's worth, I believe you. I've met guys like Darian. I know what they're capable of." That phone call gave me the strength I needed to walk into that courtroom the next day with my head held high. Darian showed up with his own lawyer, looking smug and confident like he thought he'd already won. But when Patricia presented our evidence, the text, the testimonies from the other women, the pattern of behavior, his expression shifted. The judge listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and by the end of the hearing, granted the restraining order and set a trial date for the civil suit. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Darian tried to push through without comment, but I stood tall and spoke directly to the cameras. "This ends today. No more secrets, no more shame, and no more victims." That night, I got a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped, thinking it might be Darian trying to circumvent the restraining order, but when I opened it, I saw 3 words that made me cry harder than I had in weeks. "I'm proud, Mama." It was from Amara. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. A crack in the wall between us, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. I texted back immediately. "I love you, baby. I'm so sorry. I'm going to keep fighting." She didn't respond, but she didn't have to. Those 3 words were enough to remind me why I was doing this, enough to fuel the fire that was going to burn Darian's lies to the ground, enough to remind me that I wasn't just Lorraine, the broken, lonely woman who'd made a terrible mistake. I was Lorraine the mother, Lorraine the fighter, Lorraine the survivor, and I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot, because the trial was coming. And when it did, the whole world was going to know exactly what kind of man Darian Westbrook really was. But more importantly, my daughter was going to see that her mama wasn't just sorry. Her mama was strong. And that strength was about to change everything. The trial began on a cold morning in October, the kind of day where the sky is gray and heavy, like even the weather knows something important is about to happen. I wore a navy blue dress, simple and dignified, my hair pulled back, minimal makeup. Patricia had coached me on how to present myself. Calm, credible, sympathetic, but not weak. "You're not on trial here," she reminded me as we walked up the courthouse steps. "He is," but it didn't feel that way. Every eye in that courtroom felt like a judgment on me, on my choices, on the kind of woman who could sleep with her daughter's ex. I could feel the weight of their stares, the silent questions. What kind of mother does that? How desperate do you have to be? But I held my head up because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the 3 other women who were testifying. This was about every family Darian had tried to destroy. And this was about showing Amara that when you fall, you get back up, you fight, you make it right, even if it costs you everything. Darian sat at the defense table, looking polished and put together in a sharp gray suit, his locks freshly twisted, his expression carefully neutral. But when our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw the truth underneath. He was scared. Good. He should be. Patricia started strong, painting a picture of a pattern predator who used his charm and his cooking and his smooth words to manipulate vulnerable women. She brought up the other women first: Jessica, a divorced mother of 2 from Columbia; Rhonda, a widow from Greenville; Tanya, a single mom from Rock Hill. Each of them told their stories, how Darian had dated their daughters, gotten close to them, made them feel special, and then pressured them into relationships they never wanted. Jessica broke down on the stand, describing how Darian had threatened to tell her daughter lies if she didn't continue seeing him. Rhonda testified about how he drained her emotionally and financially, borrowing money he never paid back. Tanya talked about how he'd shown up at her job, just like he'd done to me, cornering her, making her feel trapped. By the time I took the stand, the jury's faces had already shifted. They saw the pattern. They understood this wasn't about one woman's mistake. This was about a man who weaponized intimacy. Patricia walked me through my testimony carefully. I told them everything. How lonely I'd been after my divorce, how Darian had come into our lives through Amara, how I'd tried to ignore my feelings, how he'd shown up at my door that rainy night, how he'd texted me, worn me down, made me feel seen for the first time in years. I didn't hide from my guilt. I made a choice that hurt my daughter. I said, looking directly at the jury, I own that. I will regret it for the rest of my life. But what Darian did was calculated. He knew I was vulnerable, and he exploited that. And when I tried to end it, he threatened to destroy my relationship with my daughter if I didn't continue seeing him. Darian's lawyer, a slick man named Richard Holloway, tried to tear me apart on cross-examination. Isn't it true, Mrs. Lorraine, that you invited Mr. Westbrook into your home? Yes. And you engaged in a consensual relationship with him, Yes, but... And you're now suing him because you feel guilty about your own choices? Patricia objected. The judge sustained it. But I could see what Holloway was doing. He was trying to make me look like a scorned woman, a desperate older woman who'd seduced a younger man and then cried victim when it fell apart. I took a breath, steadied myself, and looked him dead in the eye. I made a mistake, but Darian Westbrook is a predator, and the evidence speaks for itself. The most powerful moment came on the 3rd day of trial when Patricia played a recording I'd made on my phone the week before the trial. Darian had violated the restraining order and called me from a friend's phone, not knowing I'd answer. In the recording, his voice was cold, threatening. You think you're going to destroy me, Lorraine? You're nothing. You're a lonely old woman who got lucky for one night. I could have had anyone, and I chose you. You should be grateful. I'd hung up immediately and reported to the police. Now, that recording played in open court, and I watched Darian's face go pale. His lawyer scrambled, tried to object, but the judge allowed it. The jury heard every venomous word. After that, the trial shifted. Holloway's defense crumbled. He tried to argue that Darian was just a man who made mistakes, that the women had misunderstood his intentions, but the pattern was too clear. 4 women, 4 similar stories, 4 families damaged by the same manipulative tactics. On the final day, I sat in the gallery and watched the jury deliberate. It took them less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. When they came back, the 4-person stood and read, "We find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. We award damages in the amount of $150,000 for emotional distress, harassment, and blackmail." The courtroom erupted. Patricia hugged me. The other women cried. Darian sat frozen, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, relieved, but mostly I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had taken back some of what he'd stolen from me. As we left the courthouse, reporters mobbed us again, but this time I wasn't alone. Jessica, Rhonda, and Tanya stood beside me, and together we made a statement. This isn't just our story, I said into the microphones. This is a warning to predators like Darian Westbrook, to men who think they can manipulate and control women without consequences. We see you. We're not afraid anymore, and we will fight back. The story went national. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with support. Hashtags started trending. Believe her, predator exposed, a mother's united. And through it all, I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message from Amara, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd seen what I'd done, that she'd understand I wasn't just sorry, I was trying to make it right. Not just for me, for her, for every woman who'd ever been made to feel small by a man like Darian. And then, 2 days after the verdict, she called. I almost dropped the phone when I saw her name. "Mama," she said when I answered, her voice thick with emotion. "Can we talk?" And just like that, everything changed again. We met at a park near her apartment, neutral ground, public enough that neither of us would break down completely. Amara sat on a bench, and I sat beside her, keeping a careful distance, waiting for her to speak first. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, watching joggers pass by, listening to the sounds of kids playing in the distance. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I watched the trial," she said quietly. "On the news. I saw everything." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And I talked to Trevor and Simone, and I've been seeing a therapist." She took a shaky breath. "I've been so angry, Mama, so hurt. I felt like you betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I still feel that. But I also understand now that Darian he's sick. What he did to you, what he did to those other women, it wasn't about you being weak or desperate. He targeted you. He manipulated you." Tears filled my eyes. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have protected you." "You should have," she agreed, and the honesty of it cut deep. "But you also shouldn't have been put in that position in the first place, and I'm starting to see that now." We talked for 2 hours. I didn't make excuses, didn't try to minimize what I'd done. I owned my mistake fully, told her how the loneliness had consumed me, how I'd convinced myself I could keep it separate from our relationship, how wrong I'd been. And she listened, really listened. When I finished, she wiped her eyes and said, "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Mom. I don't know if I ever will completely. But I do know that you're my mom and you fought for me. You stood up in front of the world and exposed him for what he was. That took courage. I would do anything for you," I whispered. "I always will." She nodded slowly. "I know. And I love you. I'm not ready to go back to how things were. I need time." "Take all the time you need," I said. "I'll be here whenever you're ready." We hugged then, a tentative, fragile hug that felt like the first step on a very long road. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to healing, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The months that followed were slow and painful. Amara and I texted occasionally, surface-level conversations about work and weather and nothing that mattered. She came to Thanksgiving dinner but left early. Christmas was awkward, forced smiles and careful small talk, but we kept showing up, kept trying, and little by little, the walls between us started to crack. Simone helped, playing mediator, reminding both of us that family wasn't about being perfect. It was about fighting for each other, even when it hurt. By spring, Amara agreed to have coffee with me once a week. We'd sit in a little cafe downtown and talk about real things again. Her job, her relationship with Trevor, my therapy sessions. Because yes, I'd started seeing someone too, working through the loneliness and the guilt and the desperate need for validation that had led me down this path. I learned things about myself I didn't want to face. That I'd spent so many years being mom and grandma that I'd lost Lorraine completely. that I'd let my identity become so wrapped up in taking care of others that I didn't know how to take care of myself. That loneliness had made me vulnerable in ways I'd never admitted. And slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild not just my relationship with Amara, but my relationship with myself. Darian, meanwhile, had disappeared. His catering business collapsed after the trial. His reputation was destroyed. Last I heard, he'd moved to Florida, trying to start over somewhere new. Good. I hoped every woman in Florida saw his face on the news and ran the other direction. The restraining order was permanent, and he hadn't contacted me or any of the other women since the verdict. Sometimes I wondered if he felt any remorse, any guilt for the lives he'd destroyed, but mostly I didn't think about him at all. He'd taken up enough space in my head, in my life. I wasn't giving him any more. By the time summer rolled around, Amara and I had found a new rhythm. We weren't back to where we'd been before, maybe we never would be, but we were building something different, something more honest. One Saturday afternoon, she showed up at my door with a bag of groceries and said, "Teach me how to make your mac and cheese, the real way, not the box stuff." I laughed, a real laugh, and let her in. We spent the afternoon in my kitchen, just like old times, cooking and talking and laughing. And when we sat down to eat, she looked at me across the table and said, "I think I'm ready to forgive you, Mama. Not forget, but forgive." I cried into my plate, and she reached across and squeezed my hand. "I love you," I said. "I love you too," she replied. "And I'm glad you fought back. I'm glad you didn't let him win." That night after she left, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and watched the sunset. I thought about everything I'd been through, everything I'd lost and gained. I'd made a terrible mistake, one that had cost me dearly. But I'd also found strength I didn't know I had. I'd stood up for myself and for other women. I'd rebuilt my relationship with my daughter, brick by painful brick. And I learned that loneliness doesn't have to define you, that needing validation doesn't make you weak, that falling doesn't mean you can't get back up. I wasn't the same woman who'd opened that door to Darian on a rainy night. That woman was broken, desperate, invisible. The woman I was now, she was scarred. She was imperfect, but she was whole. And she wasn't invisible anymore. She was Lorraine, just Lorraine. And that was enough, more than enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I smiled because for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not Mama, not Grandma, just me. And I was finally okay with that. The road ahead was still long, but I wasn't walking it alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Everything was finally starting to feel normal again when the call came. It was a Thursday evening, and I was at home making dinner when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Ms. Lorraine?" A woman's voice, young, shaking. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Kendra. I'm calling because I need your help. It's about Darian Westbrook." My blood went cold. I sat down at my kitchen table, gripping the phone. "What about him?" "He's here in Tampa, and he's doing it again. He's dating my mom, and I think he's trying to. I saw the news coverage of your trial. I recognized him. Please, I don't know what to do." My heart started pounding. "Kendra, slow down. Tell me everything." She told me how Darian had moved to Florida 6 months ago, started a new catering business under a slightly different name, how he'd met her mother, Lisa, a divorced nurse with 2 daughters, how he'd charmed his way into their lives just like he'd done to us. And now Kendra suspected he was getting close to Lisa, manipulating her, starting the same sick cycle all over again. "My mom won't listen to me," Kendra said, crying now. "She thinks he's perfect. She thinks I'm just being difficult, but I know something's wrong. I can feel it." I closed my eyes, rage and determination flooding through me. I thought it was over. I thought Darian was finished, that the trial had ended his ability to hurt anyone else. But predators don't stop. They just move. They find new hunting grounds, new victims, new families to destroy. "And Kendra," I said, my voice steady and firm, "you did the right thing calling me. I'm going to help you, but I need you to do exactly what I say, okay?" "Okay," she whispered. Over the next hour, I walked her through everything. I told her to document every interaction Darian had with her mother, to save texts, emails, anything that showed his pattern of behavior. I connected her with Patricia Chin, my lawyer, who agreed to take the case pro bono, and then I made a decision that would change everything again. I called Amara. "Mama, what's wrong?" She could hear it in my voice. I told her about Kendra, about Darian, about what he was doing in Florida, and I told her what I was planning to do. "I'm going down there. I'm going to stop him. I'm going to make sure he never does this to another family." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Amara said, "I'm coming with you." We flew to Tampa 2 days later, me, Amara, and Simone, who refused to be left behind. Patricia connected us with a local attorney, and together we met with Kendra and her family. Lisa, her mother, was skeptical at first. She looked at us like we were crazy women with an agenda. "Darian told me about you," she said, crossing her arms. "He said you were obsessed with him, that you tried to trap him, and when it didn't work, you ruined his life." I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. "Lisa, I understand why you'd believe that. Darian is very good at playing the victim. But I'm asking you as one mother to another to just listen. Look at the evidence, look at the pattern, and then decide for yourself." Amara stepped forward. "He dated me. He broke my heart, and then he went after my mother. He manipulates families. It's what he does. Please don't let him do it to yours." Kendra handed her mother a folder filled with printouts, news articles about the trial, testimony transcripts, photos of the other women who'd come forward. Lisa's hand shook as she flipped through the pages. I watched the realization dawn on her face, the horror, the betrayal. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's been lying to me this whole time." Within 24 hours, Lisa filed a police report. We connected her with the other survivors from my trial, and together we built a case. Florida authorities opened an investigation into Darian for fraud, harassment, and stalking. Within a week, he was arrested. I stood outside the courthouse when they brought him in, handcuffed, his head down. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in rage. "You couldn't just let it go, could you?" He spat. I walked right up to him, close enough that the officer between us tensed. "I will never let it go," I said, my voice low and steady. "Every woman you try to hurt from now on will know your name, will know your face, will know exactly what you are. You made a mistake, Darian. You underestimated me. You underestimated all of us." He opened his mouth to respond, but the officer pulled him away. I watched them take him inside, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just peace, because I'd done what I set out to do. I'd protected another family, I'd stopped him, and I'd done it with my daughters by my side. That night, the three of us, me, Amara, and Simone, sat in a hotel room eating takeout and talking until 2 a.m. We talked about everything we'd been through, everything we'd learned, everything we'd survived. And somewhere in those hours, something shifted. Amara looked at me and said, "Mama, I forgive you completely. Not because what you did was okay, but because you've spent every day since then proving that you're more than your worst mistake. You fought for me. You fought for these women. You didn't hide. You didn't run. You stood up and made it right." I pulled her into my arms and sobbed. "I love you so much, baby. I'm so sorry for everything." "I know, Mama," she whispered. I know." Simone joined the hug, and the three of us held each other, crying and laughing and healing. We'd been broken, but we were putting ourselves back together, not perfectly, but together, and that was what mattered. The next morning we flew home, and I knew with absolute certainty that no matter what came next, we'd face it as a family. Stronger, wiser, unbreakable, because we'd survived Darian Westbrook, and we'd made damn sure no one else would have to. 6 months later, I stood in front of a room full of women at a community center in Charlotte, my hands sweating, my voice shaking, but my resolve solid as steel. This was the first meeting of what we were calling the Survivors Circle. a support group for women who'd been manipulated, exploited, or abused by predatory men. Patricia had helped me set it up, and the response had been overwhelming. 23 women showed up that first night, each with her own story, her own scars, her own journey toward healing. I told them mine, every painful detail, holding nothing back. And when I finished, a woman in the back row stood up and said, "Thank you for not hiding. Thank you for showing us we're not alone." That moment changed everything. The group grew. We met every Tuesday evening, sharing our stories, supporting each other, learning how to recognize red flags, how to protect ourselves, how to reclaim our power. Some nights were heavy, filled with tears and rage. Other nights were lighter, filled with laughter and hope. But every single night, we reminded each other of one fundamental truth. We were survivors, not victims, and we were stronger together. Amara became my biggest supporter. She started coming to the meetings, sharing her perspective as a daughter who watched her mother fall and get back up. Her testimony helped other women understand that healing was possible, that families could be rebuilt, that mistakes didn't define you forever. Trevor proposed to her in the spring, a beautiful sunset proposal on the beach that made me cry happy tears for the first time in what felt like forever. She asked me to help plan the wedding, and we spent weekends looking at venues and tasting cakes and laughing over seating charts. It felt like a gift I didn't deserve, but was grateful for every single day. Simone graduated with her master's degree and moved back to Charlotte, taking a job at a nonprofit that supported survivors of domestic violence. The three of us had dinner together every Sunday, just like old times, except now there were no secrets between us. No shame, no walls, just love, messy, complicated, beautiful love. And I finally understood that family wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Darian was sentenced to 3 years in prison for stalking, fraud, and violating restraining orders. It wasn't enough in my opinion, but it was something. More importantly, his name was now in a database, flagged for future background checks, a permanent warning to anyone who might encounter him. The other women from the trial, Jessica, Rhonda, and Tanya, became close friends. We texted regularly, met for coffee, supported each other through hard days. We'd been through hell together, and that bond was unbreakable. Jessica started her own blog, writing about her experience and helping other women spot manipulative behaviors. Rhonda went back to school to become a counselor. Tanya wrote a book about her journey, which was picked up by a publisher and released the following year. We were turning our pain into purpose. And it felt powerful. As for me, I started dating again. Not because I needed a man to complete me, but because I'd finally learned how to be alone without being lonely. I went on a few awkward first dates, laughed about them with my daughters, and eventually met someone kind and genuine. A retired teacher named Bernard, who loved jazz music and cooking and long conversations about everything and nothing. We took it slow, no rushing, no pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was choosing someone because I wanted to, not because I was desperate to feel seen. 1 year after the trial, I stood at Amara's wedding, watching her walk down the aisle in a stunning white dress, her smile radiant, her eyes locked on Trevor. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I held my breath for just a second. Some irrational part of me worried that the past would come crashing in, but nothing happened. Just joy, just love, just a beautiful beginning for my baby girl. At the reception, Amara pulled me aside during the mother-daughter dance. "Thank you, Mama," she said as we swayed to the music, "for fighting, for not giving up, for showing me what real strength looks like." I kissed her forehead, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," she said firmly. "You made a mistake, but you're human, and you're my mama, and I love you." We held each other on that dance floor, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. The pain, the healing, the love, It was all real, and that was enough. Later that night, I stood on the balcony of the reception hall, looking out over the city lights, a glass of champagne in my hand. Simone came up beside me, slipping her arm through mine. "You good, Mama?" she asked. I nodded, smiling. "Yeah, baby, I'm good. I'm really good." And I meant it. I'd been through hell and back. I'd made mistakes that nearly destroyed my family. I'd been manipulated, betrayed, broken, but I'd also fought back. I'd stood up for myself and for other women. I'd rebuilt my relationships. I'd found my strength. I'd healed. The journey wasn't over. Healing never really is. But I was no longer defined by what Darian had done to me or what I'd done in my loneliness. I was defined by what I'd done after, by how I'd risen, by how I'd fought, by how I'd loved. I was Lorraine, not perfect, not unscathed, but whole. And as I stood there with my daughter beside me, my other daughter dancing below, and a future stretching out before me, full of possibility, I realized something important. I'd spent so many years trying to be what everyone needed me to be that I'd forgotten to just be me. But now I knew exactly who I was. I was a mother, a grandmother, a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd fallen and gotten back up, a woman who'd faced her demons and won. And that woman, she was enough. She'd always been enough. She just hadn't known it yet, but she knew it now, and she was never forgetting it again. The music drifted up from the reception, Amara's laughter carrying on the breeze, and I smiled. This was my story. Messy, painful, beautiful, real, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it, because every scar had made me stronger. Every tear had washed me clean. Every mistake had taught me something I needed to know. I was 53 years old, and I was just getting started. The best was yet to come. I could feel it, and this time I was ready.